Hello and welcome to the Capitol Report on NTD Television. I'm Steve Lance. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill have reached a bipartisan agreement on a government funding bill, but some are decrying the last-minute sprint to shove the bill through both chambers just before a new Congress is sworn in. We have our Melina Wisecup with us to break it down. So, Melina, here it is, more than 2 months past the October 1st deadline to get this funding bill done. Now we have this process stretching into next week, just before Christmas. What exactly is going on here?
So government funding runs out this Friday, so lawmakers are passing another short-term extension while the full bill for 2023 is still being worked on. Senate Leader Chuck Schumer today expressing optimism that they're making progress.
Congress now has a roadmap for funding the government before the conclusion of the 117th Congress. We still have a long way to go, but a framework is a big step in the right direction.
But some Republicans see it as quite the opposite. This last-minute sprint has led to a number of Republicans to oppose this effort for a number of reasons. One of those reasons being what they call a lack of transparency and no time to debate.
Like, we're down here basically in a fake debate. That's what we all know. I mean, the truth is, it's not like we have a body, the chamber filled here with human beings debating this $1.7 trillion.
And these same points were echoed by some Senate Republicans today, specifically a group including Senators Rick Scott, Mike Lee, and others have repeatedly split with Senate leadership on this. They have called on Republican leadership in the Senate to pass a short-term funding bill that would expire early into next year. This way, Republicans would have more control over what goes in this bill. So the real question is why would Republican leadership in the Senate not want to go in this direction? Because it would ultimately give them more control over this government funding bill. While some in leadership, specifically Senator Roy Blunt, has said that they don't want to put too much pressure on a newly elected Republican majority, especially with such a slim margin that they'll be working with in the House. And this is even more the case as we see some frictions break out already in the Republican Party in the House over whether or not to elect Leader McCarthy to that speakership position. I asked Leader McCarthy about this specifically, and he says that he believes that Republicans in the House are at least united on the most basic fronts.
Well, like anything you walk through, you're going to have debate. They'd also look at what's in here to actually secure the border and stop the fentanyl coming for killing our children. What's in this legislation that actually lowers the price of gasoline and makes America energy independent?
So that was McCarthy today, joined by a number of House Republicans trying to make the case as for why they should delay this and wait for next year to pass it. But since Democrats do control the majority in the House, it's unlikely to be successful there. The only chance Republicans do have at success is for a majority of Senate Republicans to take a hard line on this. But right now, it's not looking like that's the case. So we could very well see Congress pass a $1.5 trillion government funding bill next week just before Christmas. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Melina Wisecup, NTD News.
Melina, thank you. And to find out more about this annual last-minute gigantic spending bill, we're happy to have our next guest representing Pennsylvania's 10th District, Congressman Scott Perry. Congressman Scott Perry, thank you so much for joining us.
Well, thank you so much for the opportunity.
Congressman, I'd like to get your thoughts on the omnibus bill that's on the table. Apparently, framework has been reached for another record spending bill. How do you feel about it? And it's looking like the top line number is going to be over $1.5 trillion.
Yeah, as the Fed is poised to raise rates and destroy the housing market and our economy further, trying to cool down this hyperinflation that we have most in 40 years. Okay, right here in Washington, D.C., we're going to pour the fuel, the gasoline right on that fire with another $1.5 to $1.9 trillion in new and additional spending right before Christmas. It is an outrage. The American people just sent a new Congress, a new Republican Congress to Washington, D.C. It doesn't get started till January 3rd. Meanwhile, Republicans in the Senate are willing to help the Democrats to just enshrine more of these pork projects and their priorities essentially for potentially the rest of the fiscal year and destroy American citizens' ability to pay their bills and avail themselves to opportunities in America. It is an outrage. It is unacceptable. And I hope the constituents will light up the phone lines of their United States senators, especially Republicans, and tell them to quit collaborating to bankrupt our nation.
Congressman, on another issue revolving the Congress, you've been pressing Leader McCarthy to alter some of the House rules. This can get a bit nuanced for our, your average viewer here, but if you could kind of break it down and tell us what you'd like to see changed and ultimately why.
Okay, so first of all is the why. Why would you go through all of this? And I would just refer to Einstein, who said doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different outcome is the definition of insanity. And right now, the House of Representatives is poised to do the same thing with the same people under the same conditions, but somehow think we're going to get a different outcome. And today, this week, next week with this Omni is just what we're going to keep seeing. So what we want, among other things, is 72 hours to read the bills. These bills are often rushed right to us. We don't know what's in them, but with threat of a shutdown, with threat of Christmas, with threat of whatever, we've got to pass them. And that's how things go poorly. We'd also like single subject bills. It happens to be Christmas time. That's great for a Christmas tree, but that's not great for legislation. So you have a National Defense Authorization Act that just came through, 4,000 pages. And of course, the Senate and some in the House are willing to put things on it like the National Voting Rights Act or something like that. Look, that's a separate bill. That might require separate arguments. That's fine, different debate, but that's not national defense. And those things need to be separate. And then germaneness, which is a term that most people don't hear, but we deal with it. Well, actually, we don't deal with it in Congress. So you have a bill on the floor, and it's a must-pass legislation, like an appropriations bill, or like the national debt, like continuing to pay our bills and reauthorizing it. Those are seen as must-pass bills. And so, since they're going, people find some reason to amend them with all manner of things that have absolutely nothing to do with the issue at hand. The American people are sick of that. They're sick of seeing the debt go through the roof and they see no change in sight. So at a minimum, those are things that we are talking about around here that absolutely have to change. We have to change the status quo if we're going to expect a different outcome moving forward. And so that's why we're having the discussion. It just absolutely has to be had. Americans are happy that they sent Republicans to control and be in charge of Congress. But if we're going to do the same things, they're going to get the same results. And Americans want somebody to go and fight against this Biden administration and the collaborators on the right that continue to impose these things on us. And this is the only way changes are going to happen.
Congressman, there are some members of the Freedom Caucus who have expressed the will to challenge Leader McCarthy for the speakership. Do you think if this all comes to terms with some of your proposed provisions, this would satisfy some of his opposition?
Well, look, I can't speak for every single member for sure. Each member has to represent their own district. But if Leader McCarthy is willing to make these changes, then he can go make the case to those individuals that the status quo is going to change. We either have to change the way we do business here, or we have to change the management of the business. We're agnostic about which one of those has to happen, but something has to be different if we're going to expect a different outcome. He's the one running for office. He's the one that wants to be speaker, so he'll have to go make the case. But we absolutely have to have something change in Washington, D.C. if we're going to see different results.
Pennsylvania Congressman Scott Perry, thank you so much.
Well, thank you very much.
As China expands its influence in Africa, the U.S. is now catching up. However, President Biden is announcing new investments in Africa, vowing to strengthen ties. NTD's Iris Tao has more.
The United States is all in on Africa's future.
President Biden welcoming nearly 50 leaders from Africa on Wednesday for a summit in Washington. The gathering, the first of its kind in 6 years, aims to reset Washington's commitment to the African continent, where China is competing for influence.
This forum is about building connections. It's about closing deals, and above all, it's about the future, our shared future.
Right before the meeting, the administration announced $55 billion in economic aid. It's also voicing support for the African Union to join the group of 20 major economies. And Biden today pitching to African leaders on the benefits of closer economic ties.
This is an enormous opportunity for Africa's future, and the United States wants to help.
Biden's speech focuses on one of the weakest elements of America's engagement with Africa, a trade relationship that has plunged sharply over the past decade. All this as China competes for influence on the continent. It has surpassed the U.S. as Africa's largest trading partner. And many of the leaders invited today have gotten years of infrastructure investment from the communist regime. The Biden administration called out China in a report this year for trying to use Africa to challenge international order and advance Beijing's own geopolitical interests. But the White House this week wouldn't say if Biden would be warning African leaders over Beijing's ambitions.
It's not going to be about other countries. It's not going to be attempting to compare and contrast. It's rather going to be about the affirmative agenda that the United States has to bring to bear with Africa.
The White House was also posed with a question of if the summit will be just a formality, and that after it's over, everyone will just go home and go back to business as usual. But the Biden administration says that won't happen, as it's appointing a special representative for summit implementation, whose job is to make sure that what comes out of the summit is implemented. Reporting in Washington, D.C., Iris Tao, NTD News.
Republican Senator Marco Rubio is introducing a bipartisan bill that could ban TikTok from operating in the United States. Republican Mike Gallagher and Democrat Raja Krishnamoorthi have also introduced companion legislation in the House. Former President Trump first attempted to ban the video sharing app during his administration. Since then, scrutiny of TikTok has grown in Washington, and lawmakers now on both sides of the aisle are pushing for a ban. At a hearing last month, FBI Director Christopher Wray said TikTok's operation in the U.S. raises national security concerns. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is based in China, and the Chinese Communist Party has the ultimate ownership of TikTok's user data. Wray also indicated that TikTok can be used to influence Americans and censor certain ideas. But the company pushing back, a TikTok spokesperson called attempts to ban the app politically motivated. The company also said that plans to secure the app's platform in the United States are well on the way. Meanwhile, governors in Utah and Tennessee are joining a wave of states banning TikTok from state-owned electronic devices. Governors in South Dakota, Maryland, and Texas have passed similar bans. And Republican attorneys general from more than 12 states are calling on Apple and Google to stop labeling TikTok as, quote, teen appropriate in their app stores. Montana's Attorney General Austin Knudsen is leading the coalition that says TikTok has a lot of controversial content that involves drugs, alcohol, sexual content, and eating disorders. The most stressful job in the United States, a urologist. This according to a new study by the Department of Labor. Many jobs are indeed taxing, but some are more than others, and that can play a factor in everyday life. According to the Department of Labor's Occupational Information Network, urologists have the most stressful job in the nation. Film and video editors have the second most stressful job, followed in third place by an anesthesiologist assistant. Others in the top 10 include judges, phone operators, acute care nurses, and retail supervisors. The findings are based on nearly 900 jobs in the U.S. A report from Mental Health America says most people will spend at least one-third of their lives at work, and 80% of those polled say work-related tension plays a factor in personal relationships. Thank you for watching the Capitol Report. If you want to see our full broadcast, check us out at epochtv.com.